Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dark Ocean. I'm your host, PJ Williams, and this is the first episode of a brand new podcast. You guys might be familiar with me and my work I've done over the years with totally plausible conspiracy theories, Conspiracy Pilled, and the show that I'm doing concurrent to this one, Real Conspiracies. That's REEL as in movie reel. And in that one, I deep dive into the occult symbolism and hidden messages in your favorite movies and video games. And after leaving Conspiracy Pilled and setting out to do something on my own, a lot of people asked me if Real Conspiracies was that thing. And it was never meant to be. It was always kind of a fun little side project. And I hope you guys watch it. It comes out every Tuesday. And I know a lot of people are enjoying it. But the answer to the question that everybody asked me, am I going to continue to do deep dives into all of these subjects outside of just movies and video games and things like that, which is just a personal passion of mine. Dark Ocean is the answer to that. The world is a dark ocean, at least in my belief. It's mysterious, it's strange, it's huge, and we don't know what to make of it. And that's something that I want to be doing on this show. I want to be deep diving into all of those topics. So to tell you a little bit about the show before we get into today's main subject, I am going to be doing some episodes like this, solo episodes. That's something that's kind of new for me. It makes me a little bit nervous to talk directly into the camera and not be live streaming or not having a co-host. So continue to support me through this. I hope you enjoy it. But on top of that, I will be having guest co-hosts coming on throughout different episodes. I'll be doing interviews, and I'm going to be covering the gambit. Tonight, we're going to be talking about conspiracy terminology. And if you wonder what I mean by that, I had this idea through a lot of comments I've gotten over the years where I really wanted to do like a 101 course on a couple of things. So every couple of episodes for the beginning of Dark Ocean, I'm going to be doing these 101 courses, and in this case, it's what are some of the common terms that you hear in conspiracy theories and conspiracy podcasts, things like PSYOP, things like limited hangout, false flag, what's the Hegelian Dialectic, what is revelation of the method, what's predictive programming, what's the difference between those two. So I'm going to be going through each one of those and giving stories and examples. So maybe you're familiar, maybe this is just a refresher, maybe you think you don't need this at all, but I'm going to be including some history, some stories, some cool stuff like that. But most of all, there are people who have come to understand or come to wake up to certain realities, realize that their government's lying to them, realize the world is bigger and stranger and weirder than they thought before. And for those people, I think they often feel like they don't want to ask questions. They hear someone say a term and they try to piece it together based on context clues. I literally had a friend this week tell me, I don't know what some of these terms mean, but at this point, I'm afraid to ask. So this is for them. This is also for if you've been in this a long time like I have, to share with your friends. And most of all, when I get into the weeds and some very deeper subjects, I want to be able to reference people back to episodes so I don't have to feel completely lost. So one of those things that people have asked me to cover is I talk about Gnosticism a lot, especially on Real Conspiracies, because I believe that it is the same message that's being put in movies and video games and books and literature, and it's just being fed to us all the time. But a lot of people don't understand what Gnosticism is, so I'm going to be doing some 101 courses on things like that. But tonight, yeah, we're going to be doing conspiracy terminology, jumping into all of that stuff. Other things I was talking about earlier that I want to get into with Dark Ocean to give you some of the gambit of things that I'm looking at right now is getting into the transhumanist agenda on an episode coming up. Actually, I'm going to be recording that later tonight. I'm used to doing live streaming, so recording ahead of time and editing and stuff like that. I'm going to try to make these very fun. We might do live streaming again at some point. But yeah, the transhuman agenda, we're going to talk to an alien abduction survivor, going to be digging into the Knights Templar, talking about high strangeness with things like time slips. So I've got a lot of stuff planned. I've been working very hard on getting the show ready for you guys. So I really hope you enjoy it. Let's just jump into it, though. So I think that one of the first things that we want to talk about, if we want to make these terms accessible, is probably the most basic one, the one that probably needs the least explaining. But I do think there's some interesting history here. We're going to be talking about the term PSYOP. So PSYOP stands for psychological operation. And this is the definition is basically when a military operation that aims to influence the behavior and emotions of individuals, organizations, or governments. So it's a type of psychological warfare. And psychological warfare has a very long history. And I'm not just talking about like, you know, he said, she said. I'm talking about like real documented history. Our government uses these tactics. The thing that conspiracy theorists are often talking about is not the reality of these tactics being used in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam. And I'll give some of those examples in a minute. But it's when our CIA and our FBI and stuff and our media are doing those things to us here. So psychological warfare has got a long history. It's got a lot of tactics, and some of those tactics include things like propaganda. Propaganda is used to shape perception. And I just want to give a quick unpopular opinion because I've had this conversation, it's a deeper conversation with a lot of people about the term propaganda. I don't think that propaganda is in and of itself evil. Propaganda basically just means to propagate a belief system, a set of values. So when you're raising your children, you're going to propagate certain ideas and customs and values and things to them. So really propaganda is about what the values are, what the ideas are, and how it's being given to people, right? So I don't know if propaganda is kind of one of those dirty words. I don't know if it really fully deserves that connotation, but people like, what I think his name is Edward Bernays, which I want to do a deeper episode on later. They've really given it that name. And one of the tactics used in psychological warfare around propaganda is something called black propaganda. And black propaganda is information that appears to come from a source other than the actual originator, and this is used to create division or tarnish reputations. So basically, it's a rumor mill thing, right? You're saying that this person said this thing. You're putting the words in somebody else's mouth, and because people believe it came from that source, maybe published under their name or whatever, that creates division. It tarnishes their reputation. That's black propaganda. We'll come back to that because it's used in another tactic we'll talk about later, another term we're going to bring up later. Another tactic of psychological warfare is disinformation and misinformation, which we hear all the time, which I find hilarious that the exact people who are using disinformation and misinformation on large mass on the American people, the media, are the same ones who are using those terms against people who want to have free speech online. They are spreading lies and confusion, and meanwhile claiming that anybody who's looking for the truth or asking questions is spreading lies and confusion. It's one of those tactics of blaming people for what you're doing. So that's another tactic of psychological warfare. Fear induction is one, and fear induction has a lot of really crazy examples being used in warfare. One of them is that during the Vietnam War, the United States military conducted a PSYOP known as Operation Wandering Soul. And the goal of this was to target North Vietnamese troops' morale by exploiting cultural beliefs about death and the afterlife. So a lot of Vietnamese people believe that a person's soul could be trapped in limbo if they didn't receive a proper burial or died far from their home. So this would be a concern in warfare. And to capitalize on this, the United States forces broadcast eerie, pre-recorded sounds and voices at night through speakers hidden in the jungle. And these recordings included moaning voices, the voices that were pretending to be ghosts of dead soldiers, and they were urging their fellow soldiers to leave the battlefield and return home to avoid a similar fate. So this is a type of fear induction PSYOP that was very successful. And in this case, it was used, PSYOPs in warfare can be used to target an enemy's mind. Sometimes that reduces the amount of casualties and things like that. So there's like a moral question there. Demoralization is another one. And the fear induction kind of falls into demoralization, making people just give up. And that's a type of PSYOP or psychological warfare. Sowing discord and division to fracture alliances and create distrust. That's something that could be used with black propaganda, rumor mill type stuff, whatever. The use of false flag operations is another type of psychological warfare. And we're going to come back to false flags in a moment. And psychological conditioning is another one. And that's where the long-term efforts are used to shape beliefs, ideologies, behaviors through repetition and indoctrination. So think movies, video games, media, whatever. You are being psychologically conditioned over a long period of time to inculcate certain beliefs in you. And our military is very well versed in PSYOPs. They have whole units dedicated to it. The Army's got the 2nd, the 4th, the 7th, and the 8th psychological operations groups, two of these are airborne operations groups. The Air Force has the Special Operations Command 193rd Special Operations Wing. The Navy has OpNavinst, I think is how you pronounce it, which is our psychological operations wing. And the Marines, they're the newest to the game. They created the MOS 0521, which is called the PSYOP Marines in 2018, which I'm not going to lie, that's a pretty badass name. And they use this, basically, they use the PSYOP Marines to try to deter the enemies from actually engaging in combat, the goal being less actual bloodshed in war. But our military is well-versed in this stuff. The problem isn't so much that they're dropping leaflets is one example. They'll drop leaflets on a place and try to scare people into surrendering. They'll miss with bombs after dropping the leaflets, and then they'll drop more leaflets and say, hey, you didn't listen to our first warning, surrender now. So like those types of psychological operations are used to reduce bloodshed. So the problem isn't always that our military has units, is well versed in this stuff. It's when the psyops start getting used at home. And this is where the CIA comes in with things like Operation Mockingbird, which was used to control public information through the hijacking of the media. Things like MK Ultra, which were experiments carried out on American citizens to understand and control human consciousness. Those are things that were the CIA used. And these are just really brief examples. I want to go deeper into these on future episodes. Obviously, I've talked in the past on other podcasts about Mockingbird at depth. Talked about it quite a bit on Real Conspiracies. MK Ultra, same thing, but I'll definitely have some different angles and things I want to cover for Dark Ocean on those subjects in the future. The FBI has a psyop that's quite famous as well that I've never actually covered on a podcast that I would like to, and it's called COINTELPRO. This is where they would plant informants, spread disinformation, and incite infighting in activist groups that they wanted to dismantle. So we have psyops being used at home. Technically, it's not legal to use psyops at home, and even more technically, whatever, it's not legal for the CIA to operate on American soil at all, but they've been doing it since forever, and nobody calls them on it. We had the Church Commission Committee in 1973, which is where we found out about all these skeletons in the CIA's closet. And if you know anything about it, you know that 0 people were charged, fired, suffered any kind of consequences for things like with Operation MK Ultra, abducting American citizens, torturing them, putting them on drugs. Point being that the reason conspiracy theorists believe and talk about psyops so much is because they're real, because our government is well versed in them, and because when our government uses them on the American people, they lie about it, it comes out, nobody gets punished. So if you're new to conspiracy and you've probably heard psyop a lot and you think it's whatever, there's a lot of historical, and I don't just mean, again, conspiratorial, whatever that means to you, but there's a lot of very hard fact historical evidence of psyops being used at home. Those are just a few examples. Another term that's kind of related, and this one will just be brief because I think most people understand this one, is gaslighting. Gaslighting is a psychological tactic that involves manipulating someone into questioning their own reality, their own perception, maybe their own memories. And the term actually comes from the movie Gaslight. And in the movie Gaslight, the plot is that this husband wants to manipulate his wife. I think it's been a minute since I've seen it. I think he wants to drive her crazy so he can get a divorce or something like that. So he's trying to manipulate her into believing she's losing her sanity by dimming the gaslight in their home a little bit each day. And he just dims it a little more each day, just a little bit at a time. And when she's noticing the changes, he lies to her. He's like, it's never changed. The gas isn't getting dimmer. And she starts to question her own reality, her own perceptions of things, her memory. And he drives her crazy with that. And one of the examples that no one brings up with gaslighting, and this is just kind of a personal pet theory of mine, is the Mandela effect. I think the Mandela effect, at least in part, is a psyop around gaslighting. And let me explain. So the Mandela effect is this social phenomena, and I think everybody understands this at this point. It's a pretty popular, well-known thing. It's a social phenomenon where a large group of people share an incorrect memory or of a popular event, person, or detail, right? So like an example of this would be, does the Monopoly guy have a monocle? And if you asked me, I would say, yeah, he has a monocle, and apparently that is a Mandela effect. That is many of us believing that the Monopoly guy had a monocle, but he doesn't in fact have a monocle. So there's one example. Another popular example, and this isn't a whole episode on Mandela effects, so I just brought up 2, is Star Wars Episode 5 is whether or not Darth Vader said, Luke, I am your father. So let's just check this out.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No, I am your father.
Yeah, so that one's weird. Like if you grew up watching Star Wars like I did, 5, 6, 7 years old, watched the trilogy a bunch of times, referenced it a million times, and you hear him say, no, I'm your father. Some people that sounds weird or wrong, right? And the reason I bring this up in gaslighting is because the Mandela effect conspiracy theory, whatever, is so popular. It's been covered by every, pop-spiracy kind of conspiracy for entertainment, but we don't really believe this stuff, podcast or the History Channel or whoever, right? And they always give you two theories. And this is kind of a thing with me when it comes to conspiracy stuff, is there's a mainstream narrative very often. Then there's a narrative that the conspiracy theorists are kind of supposed to accept and adopt. And I think in some cases, they're both kind of given to you. We'll get into the Hegelian dialectic in a minute. But the two theories that are given to you by the mainstream that everybody just kind of accepted is to question your reality. The first one is to question your reality. Do I live in a multiverse? Did I come from a different, multiverse? Do I live in a simulation? Is my reality not real in some sense, right? Like that's one mainstream one. And the other one is to question your memory. These are both examples of gaslighting. That's why I'm bringing this up. You remember incorrectly because your memory can't be trusted. So either you're distrusting your reality or you're distrusting your memory. And in both cases, you can't trust anything that you think, anything that you've seen. You just can't trust yourself at all. The reason I bring this up as a form of gaslighting is because in either case, you can't be trusted. So then basically your history books could be changed. Your reality could be changed around you. People can gaslight you and lie to you. You just kind of accept it because you've accepted one of two things. Either that your reality is ever shifting because it's a simulation or it's not real or multiverse or time shifts or whatever, or your memory's just junk, right? So like in either case, people can lie to you in whatever way they want to, and you have one of two preconceived notions on how to accept that form of gaslighting. And what I find very interesting is that I had this theory that it was a form of gaslighting, that maybe there was something deeper going on, that this whole thing, this, maybe they were changing the Monopoly guy, they're changing Fruit of the Loom or things like that, in order to run a psychological operation on the American people or on the world or whatever, to test if people will just accept that they can't trust their memories, right? If Wikipedia writes one thing, tomorrow it says another, your memory's just bad. It's not that Wikipedia is changing. It's not that your history book is changing. And I actually found a really good example of this. There's a girl on TikTok. I couldn't find the original video, but I'm just going to play this, and it kind of goes into maybe this whole thing is a giant social experiment. Maybe this whole thing is gaslighting.
I officially have government documentation that Fruit of the Loom is lying about never being associated with the cornucopia. That we should first start off with this Frank West album, Fruit of the Loom, which was made in the late 1970s and was a clear spin-off of Fruit of the Loom. I don't know how to credit a Redditor, but this one deserves an award because he went so far down the rabbit hole, he ended up reaching out to the son of the artist who created the art for the album cover. The son responded, making it very clear that Fruit of the Loom was in fact inspired by Fruit of the Loom, and the cornucopia was part of its logo. Redditor even brought receipts and took a screenshot of his email conversation. The part I'm most excited about, this is an official government document for the Fruit of the Loom trademark, and if you look at the bottom, it said baskets of fruit, containers of fruit, cornucopia, horn of plenty. And I'm not arguing that there's no room for discussion about when and how this logo was used, but it's clearly dishonest for Fruit of the Loom to make us believe we're crazy for assuming that the cornucopia was ever associated with their logo. It still makes absolutely no sense to me how each one of us have a vivid memory of our childhood asking our mom what's in the Fruit of the Loom logo, and that's how we learned what a cornucopia was. In an attempt to back Fruit of the Loom into a trademark corner, I'm now selling these sweatshirts, which means I'm about to be sued for every penny I'm worth, but they'll have to admit the cornucopia is a part of their logo, or I will become a trillionaire. Either way, it's a win-win for me. If you would like to be a part of the chaos, you can buy one by clicking the shopping link on my page, or it's linked in the video right before this.
So I don't know what is going on with her eyes, but I just find that whole thing so fascinating. So maybe we'll cover some more Mandela effect stuff in the future, but I think it's at least possible this is a form of gaslighting. It's a form of a psychological operation of some sort. Another term that gets thrown a lot in conspiracy circles that I'm sure some people are not super familiar with is the term limited hangout. So limited hangout is spy jargon. It comes to the public first from this guy named Victor Marchetti, who was a former special assistant to the deputy director of the CIA. Sounds very Dwight. Anyway, he said, a limited hangout is spy jargon for a favorite and frequently used gimmick of the clandestine professionals. When their veil of secrecy is shredded and they can no longer rely on a phony cover story to misinform the public, they resort to admitting something, even volunteering some of the truth, while still managing to withhold the key and damaging facts in the case. The public, however, is usually so intrigued by the new information that it never thinks to pursue the matter further. So to sum this up, a limited hangout is used to control narratives by releasing some truth to satisfy curiosity while concealing larger, more damaging information. So an example of this, one of my favorite examples of this, is actually the Epstein files. If you guys remember, the public waited years to get a list of the Epstein flight logs, right? Ghislaine Maxwell's arrested. She's got Epstein's little black book. The government, the prosecutors, whatever, they have the names. They know the people who flew to Epstein Island. They've probably got the tapes. They've probably got all of this stuff. And people were waiting for some type of justice to be done. Then in December of 2023, we get the Epstein files, and everybody's waiting for this drop, this big drop, the Epstein files, and we're looking forward to it. And people like me sat and read through, skimmed, scanned, whatever through, I don't even remember at this point how many hundreds of pages it was of this Epstein file, just to find out that this is just a 2018 court case involving Ghislaine Maxwell that had a few redactions removed. It was something that was already public information, minus a few redactions. And instead, we're all looking at this limited hangout thinking we're getting the truth and we're infatuated by this thing. And it was disappointing, right? Everyone rushed to dig through these already public files. The report's disappointing, so people walk away with one of two things. Either people believe that there really is nothing to the Epstein files and they just give up. You know, we thought there's a smoking gun here. We thought Epstein did all these things. And instead, we're getting this unrelated-ish court case of Ghislaine Maxwell and a couple of 18 to 19-year-old girls that Epstein pimped out. Still bad. Not even close to how awful the Epstein stuff really gets. And then we get this, we get some names we already knew. We already knew that Bill Clinton flew 37 times on the Lolita Express. We knew that Trump and Epstein had hung out before. And we get this story from a 19-year-old girl that says that she had sex with Trump one time at the behest of Epstein. So it's bad, but it's also not pedophilia. So it's like, what do we do with this stuff? And people just kind of take away, oh, I don't like Trump, therefore I can think all these bad things about Trump now because he's connected. Or I don't like the Democrats, and I've got more proof that I already kind of had anyway about Bill Clinton and some others. And, oh, here's a salacious bit of information. Bruce Willis once showed up to Epstein's house. You know, like stuff like that was in these files, and it was really nothing. So you either believe that there's really nothing there, and you kind of move on, or you become infatuated with the new rumors, and that becomes the new story. The new story becomes, Trump maybe had sex with a 19-year-old one time that was working for Epstein, or Bill Clinton, this and that and the other. But what we should remember is that Epstein had very young, underage girls on an island. Tons of politicians flew there. And instead, we're getting this salacious limited hangout, right? People are infatuated with this new limited hangout, this limited information that doesn't really damn anybody. Nobody's going to prison over this stuff. Nobody's getting, and eventually people just give up, right? The limited hangout makes people go, oh, this is all it is. And they give up, right? Another example of this is LoveInt. This is after Edward Snowden blew the whistle on the NSA spying operation. And he basically proved that all of your phones, all of your email records were readily available to be listened to and read by the NSA. So then on August 23rd, 2013, John DeLong, the NSA's chief compliance officer, revealed during a conference call to reporters that some of the members of the NSA and other agencies used resources to spy on spouses and lovers. So what we get from Edward Snowden in 2012 is every single phone, email, call, text, whatever, biometric data, everything is accessible by the NSA. They can listen to anything that you say, and it's everyone. It's huge. The limited hangout is, hey, I'm the NSA chief compliance officer, and I'm going to spill the tea on a couple of people who misuse the NSA's spying apparatus to spy on their girlfriends. So this became known as LoveInt, or Love Intelligence, and the public latched onto this shocking revelation that was far less nefarious of a story. Like, it's still bad, but like a couple of NSA people using their gross powers to spy on a loved one is bad. But it's also not like the NSA spying on all of us all the time, everything, everywhere, everything we do, right? So the NSA volunteers this information to the press, by the way, with the clarification that such activities are a rare occurrence and that the agency members who participated were disciplined or fired. So it's a scandal that was neatly taken care of in-house by the NSA, right? The NSA doesn't need to be defunded and shut down because, hey, here was a time where our own employees did something bad. Forget about the other super bad thing we're all into and we're all doing, which is spying on the American people all the time, everything they do, whatever. But a couple of people, they spied on their loved ones and we took care of it. So we can police our own. We don't need to be defunded. This is how limited hangouts work. And it worked way too well. So that's the gist of a limited hangout. There's also something called a modified limited hangout. And unlike a traditional limited hangout, which involves releasing partial information or a modified, involves releasing partial information. A modified limited hangout might change the details or introduce a new element to redirect attention away from the real issue. So almost the same thing, but a little bit more lying is kind of the way to put it. So the term was coined by Richard Nixon in a now released recording where he was talking about diverting attention away from the Watergate scandal using what he called a modified limited hangout. And that's a whole nother story about why Nixon's office was bugged and all that stuff, and Watergate. That would be a cool future episode we can talk about. Maybe even if it was framed. I don't know. There's like a lot of theories there. But basically, when the story of the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters started to gain traction, Nixon's aides and senior officials released selective and manipulated details. They acknowledged that the break-in happened and that it involved people who were connected to the Republican Party. There's your limited hangout. But they framed the incident as a result of rogue operatives acting independently, right? That's the lie. That's the modified limited hangout, because what they altered essentially is that every single person involved was former operatives of the CIA. So it was a couple of rogue people. Also, they altered specifics about funding and organization of the break-in, and they shifted all the blame to lower level rogue operatives. Yeah, there was a couple of staffers at the Republican Party who did this thing, and it's like, no, it was Richard Nixon's CIA that did this thing. So that's the modified limited hangout, is offering information but then twisting it, lying about it, getting people to look somewhere else. It's more of a stalling tactic. At least that's how this modified limited hangout was used, was as a stalling tactic, because all this stuff they knew was eventually going to come out. But they got people looking in the wrong direction and kind of worked on the cover up behind the scenes from there. So that's limited hangout, modified limited hangout. False flag. That's another one you've probably heard a lot. This is an action or an event that is made to appear as it was carried out by someone other than the actual perpetrator. So this is used generally to generate sympathy for the attacked group or as a pretext to war. So a country attacks itself, blames it on another, and you get your war, right? There's a good reason, and I want to point this out because I'm going to give some examples. So there's a very good reason, if you're new to conspiracy stuff, if you're trying to learn this jargon for the first time, why conspiracy theorists believe that so many things are false flags, why they believe things like 9/11 and Pearl Harbor and so many others are false flags. And that's because it has been so many times in history that were literally false flags. History's riddled with them, right? And when they're really close to us, we kind of think that it's weird conspiracy stuff and how dare you, but that's how they work, right? They get the pretext to war, and that doesn't matter if it comes out later. So some examples of this, the Reichstag fire. This one is openly acknowledged by everybody of all sides. This was a false flag, right? The Reichstag fire happened February 27th, 1933. It's 4 weeks after Hitler was sworn in as Chancellor of Germany. The Reichstag building was the home of German parliament, and it was set on fire and blamed on Marianus van der Lubbe, who's a Dutch communist. The police, who are now part of the Nazi party, started arresting all communists, including the Reichstag delegates, which in and of itself doesn't sound so bad, arresting communists. But they arrested them so they couldn't vote in the March 5th elections that were coming up. So this false flag attack led to the total Nazi control of Germany. It is now widely believed and understood to have been a Nazi operation to seize control. They set the fire, they blame the other guy, they take the power. That's the false flag, right? And it would be nice if these false flags were just the evil Nazis doing them. But unfortunately, our own government has a very long and sordid history of false flag operations. I found this article from this Australian website that I want to share. It was called The False Flag Empire. I'll actually put this in the description of the show because I think it's really interesting. It's a little short. It's not like super detailed, but it's a good launching off point to understand how some of these false flags work. So if you look through this, you'll see things like the Spanish-American War in 1898. This is a very famous false flag. It's when the surprise explosion of the battleship Maine at Havana, Cuba, in which 255 of the crew died. The Hearst Press accused the Spanish, claiming that the explosion was caused by a remote-controlled mine. The USA declared war on Spain and conquered the Philippines, Guam, and Cuba. Subsequent investigations revealed the explosion originated inside the Maine. That was either an accident, such as a coal explosion, or some type of time bomb inside the battleship. Divers investigated the shipwreck, found that the armor plates of the ship were blowing outwards and not inwards. So it's been conclusively proven that Spain did not attack America, and whether the USS Maine was blown up on purpose or that the Hearst press just used this to funnel a war to sell more newspapers, which is kind of the plot of Citizen Kane. By the way, it's actually talking about this very specific incident, this person using the newspaper to start a war to sell more newspapers. So there's a lot of different angles to this, but history kind of now acknowledges after, we went and conquered 3 countries that we were not attacked by Spain. That the whole precursor for the war was in fact not true. Number 5 on this list is Vietnam War Tonkin incident. This one's really interesting. The National Security Agency, the NSA, admitted it lied about what really happened at the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964 by manipulating data to make it look like the North Vietnamese boats fired on a U.S. ship so as to create a false justification for the Vietnam War. So in short, America tried to provoke the Vietnam into an attack to justify entering the war to, fight against the communists. And then when they couldn't get the Vietnamese to shoot at them, they just lied about it. That's the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Again, widely recognized as a false flag at this point. There's a lot of question here as if every war we've been in is a false flag. I'm just trying to skim through this so to show you the examples. U.S. and Israel sponsored war between Iraq and Iran in 1980 to 1988. It says the CIA organized a coup of 1953, replaced Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh, I have no idea how to say that, Mossadegh, with the dictatorial Shah, who was given the best Western military equipment. But after the revolt against the Shah, the U.S. supported Saddam Hussein to attack Iran with strategic support and weapons, including gas warfare agents. Too bad they both cannot lose is how Kissinger evaluated the situation. And the reason I bring that one up is because how the U.S. used this false flag to support Saddam actually leads into 2 other wars that happened, namely the Gulf War and then, the Operation Iraqi Freedom. And if we look at number 10, this last one, I'll read off this list really quick. It says Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, 1991. Saddam Hussein asked for permission from the U.S. to attack Kuwait, which had been asked by the U.S. to put pressure on Saddam to pay money back lent to fight against Iran. Talking about that earlier thing that I just read. Kuwait was also illegally siphoning oil from the Iraqi fields, so Saddam was told by Gillespie that the U.S. does not care about Arab quarrels, and that was a trap. And after Saddam occupied Kuwait, George Bush Sr. mobilized a coalition of some 40 nations to liberate Kuwait and smash the recently built Iraqi military power base. They also involved a media hoax where the daughter of Kuwait's U.S. ambassador played a nurse on TV and testified to witnessing Iraqi soldiers throwing babies out of incubators in Kuwait. I believe I brought that up on, if you've been watching Real Conspiracies, I brought it up on the Wag the Dog episode. This is called the Naraya testimony. This is also known to have been complete fabrication, but it was a justification for, we already had Operation Desert Shield, and that was when we started to occupy, and then Desert Storm is when we got 40 countries to sweep through 3 other countries and do this crazy, huge military maneuver to overthrow Saddam. And the justification for Operation Desert Storm came in large part due to the Naraya testimony, which was completely fabricated. So got a lot of false flags, a lot of lying. You could probably put Pearl Harbor in there, but that's a future episode. I would definitely put 9/11 in there, especially when you add in the anthrax attacks onto that as false flag operations to start a war. But a more modern example, I should say, is in the Nord Stream pipeline. If you guys remember September 26, 2022, a series of underwater explosions and gas leaks occurred on the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. These are the pipelines that Joe Biden said if Russia built, they would blow up. They were carrying natural gas from Russia to Europe, and America and Ukraine then blamed Russia. Russia is literally builds 2 huge pipelines. Russia, as some people have described it, is an oil station with a country attached to it, right? Like this is how they make their money. And then we're supposed to believe that Russia, during a war with Ukraine, decides to blow up its own pipelines into Europe for some reason. But people believe this. This is a justification for further funding of Ukraine and further aid from UN in the war and things like that. They claim that Russia sabotaged its own pipelines, lost billions of dollars, and nobody seemed to ask the question why. Why would Russia do this? It was the most retarded thing. Actually, I'm lying. A lot of people asked this. This was one of the most blatant false flag attacks ever carried out, ever, and almost no one believed it. Except, we're still siphoning billions and billions and billions of dollars of money laundering into Ukraine. So after a bunch of investigations, some were shut down pretty quickly in weird ways. But after a bunch of investigations by multiple countries, all of them get shut down except the German one. And in June of 2024, German authorities issued a European arrest warrant for a Ukrainian national suspected of having used the yacht Andromeda together with 2 others to sabotage the Nord Stream pipelines, presumably to increase support for Ukraine. So the mainstream media doesn't talk about that, by the way. I've heard zero people talk about, hey, remember that pipeline explosion that we blamed on Russia and then sent $80 billion to Ukraine? That was Ukraine doing it to Russia because that actually makes sense. Instead of whatever BS they were selling us. But it worked, supposedly, somewhat. Even though nobody believed it, who cares? Because it doesn't really matter at some point whether or not we believe the media as long as people just go along with it, right? You can know they're lying to you, but just don't do anything about it. Don't say too much. Another term that gets often used in conspiracy circles and things like this, the Hegelian Dialectic. And this one can get quite into the weeds. I'm sure that philosophy majors will hate how I describe this because I watched a lot of philosophy major videos on no, the Hegelian Dialectic is so much deeper and this and that and the other. And it is. All of that's true, but it doesn't matter in this case because the premise that I'm describing is often called the Hegelian Dialectic. It comes originally from an argument proposed by a 19th century German philosopher, George William Friedrich Hegel. I'm probably saying his name wrong. And the dictionary definition is an imperative method in which the contradiction between a proposition and its antithesis is resolved at a higher level of truth. What the hell does all this mean, right? And again, there's the philosophy majors arguing about it in these long lectures, but there's a simple way of understanding it. A simple way of understanding it is going to help you understand the operations of control and manipulation that are being used, that are being described by the Hegelian Dialectic in these circles. So the simplest way of understanding is understanding the 3-part process that the conspiracy theorists are talking about. Forget what the philosophy majors say. They can get off in the weeds. That's not important. But the 3-part process is basically this: thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, aka problem, reaction, solution. You often hear it called problem, reaction, solution. So let's break down what that means. So the problem or the thesis is when you create a problem. And often this is a problem that's maybe created through a false flag or psyop or something like that. But you create the problem, right? And when I say you, I mean the people in control who are manipulating the process, who are manipulating the Hegelian dialectic to get a certain solution, right? So create the problem, then the problem gets a predicted reaction through either control of the media or political parties or just kind of understanding hey, if we do this, they're going to want this. And then we're going to offer them the solution that we already knew, right? We knew the solution we wanted to get to, but we had to create the problem to get the reaction to get the solution, right? Problem, reaction, solution. So the problem, the solution, you offer the solution to the problem that you created, the solution that would not have been accepted unless the problem had been created to get the controlled reaction, right? This is manipulation, right? That's the whole point of this. An example of problem, reaction, solution is that anthrax is sent to Congress and the media in 2001. The reaction is that the media is told to blame Saddam, and they do. They blame Saddam, and they further blame the inability to use warrantless wiretaps on suspected terrorists. And the solution is that the Patriot Act gets passed and we invade Iraq. It doesn't matter that years later we found out the FBI knew the entire time that anthrax came from a U.S. lab and had no ties to Iraq. There was no bentonite clay in it, whatever other lies they said. But because the problem was scary and terrifying, and it's anthrax and it's death and destruction and war, and the media is giving us the reaction and telling us how to react and telling us how to be afraid and telling us who to be afraid of, we then give the solution that we would have never given the Patriot Act and the Iraq War and things like that, because the problem and the reaction were created and controlled, right? So another summary of this, here's just a picture. Problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem and blame someone else. The public's reaction is to demand a solution, and the solution or the secret agenda is then implemented. Problem, reaction, solution. So another way that this often works has to do with politics. And I'll try my best to explain this one. But in this case, with the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis, you can look at it in a different way where like the thesis would be something like a mainstream view of the establishment. And I'm recording this on the day of the election before we know who wins. So for sake of argument, in this case, the Democrats are in power. And either way, the Democrats are looked at as being in power of the institutions, the colleges, the media, things like that, right? So they're the establishment. The antithesis or the opposing view, the anti-establishment, would be the Republicans, looked at as always being on the defense. And in reality, they're both parts of controlled opposition in large form. We'll come back to controlled opposition in a minute. The synthesis, the goal is to get a compromise between the two radically opposed ideas that would bring about a new belief system. And with that, you can shift the norms of a culture and bend them to your will. So Trump wrote The Art of the Deal, right? The oversell. So the Democrats might act this super crazy, blue-haired, liberal, zany way, right? And if the Republicans are just to the right of them, you know, the middle shifts, right? Your Overton window shifts, the goal shifts. So all the left has to do is go crazier this way, and the Republicans moving this way, they're still looked as the opposing, even if now they're standing where the Democrats were before. And we get this synthesis. We're moving kind of like a slinky in one direction. That's one way to look at it. You got two controlled oppositions, and we just get people in the middle of that. And that's the actual goal, right? Radically opposing ideas, but the true reality is that they want a goal that's somewhere between the two, and they kind of create these situations to get that. Another way to look at this is that maybe you only have to have one side that actually compromises, right? So let's look at it this way: Trump as the antithesis, right? So you've got the Joe Biden, the Democrats, whatever. They're not the synthesis. They are the thesis. Trump is the antithesis, and anything he does against the thesis is good in the eyes of his supporters, right? So the left already wants gun control. They want bump stock bans, for example. But if Trump, who's opposing them, all of a sudden he likes bump stock bans, well, now the Republicans are for it. The left was for it. Now the right supports it, even if it's begrudgingly, because to oppose Trump is to stand with the Dems. So you've got a way to control people on both sides, right? As long as they're opposed to the other, it doesn't matter if both sides are controlled. They're getting their synthesis. They're getting people to line up how they want them to by using both sides, by using this pyramid, right? This thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? Controlled opposition. Let's talk about that for a minute. This is where you use black propaganda and saboteurs who claim to support or oppose a particular faction, but are in fact working for the opposite faction. And my favorite example of controlled opposition, a historical example that involves someone that I'm sure we'll talk about more on Dark Ocean in the future, is a guy named Aleister Crowley. The Beast 666, one of the most evil men in the world. A lot of people don't know this about Aleister Crowley, but during World War I, he was working for the British government. And he came to America and he worked for a German propaganda paper. And this is where he wrote pro-Kaiser articles in a German newspaper to make the enemy seem ridiculous, right? This is him pretending to work for the people that his country who hired him for is opposed to in order to make them look stupid. So he's making them look ridiculous to the Americans. He's also working to convince the Germans through this propaganda paper and through his work, as controlled opposition. He's convincing the Germans that a show of force is what would make America back off. That if the Germans want to make sure that America stays out of the war, which is bad for the Germans, that what they should do is shoot a shot across the bow, sink a ship, do something to scare them away. He's convinced them as controlled opposition to do that. He's convinced the Americans that the Germans are ridiculous and stupid and evil and crazy and whatever. And he's convinced the Germans that the Americans will cower at the first sign of a threat. And ultimately, these two things are what led America into the war. They had a certain view of Germany. Americans had a certain view of Germany, and the Germans had a certain view of Americans that ended up working for their favor because ultimately the Germans sunk the Lusitania, and the Lusitanians ultimately led America to join the war. And he ended up, so he was working for British intelligence who greatly benefited from Americans' help. They wanted to draw America into the war. So the way they did that was to use Aleister Crowley as controlled opposition, working for the Germans, making them look ridiculous, making the Americans think a certain way, making the Germans think a certain way. That's how controlled opposition works. That's one of my favorite historical examples of controlled opposition, but you can fill a lot of them in there. And I hope I'm doing a good job of explaining these concepts to new people. If I miss anything, if there's phrases that you want to see or hear in the future, leave a comment. I'll do my best to explain. I'll do a follow-up to this with more stuff if you guys like these types of videos. And again, I plan on doing other 101 courses on things like Gnosticism and Freemasonry and stuff like that to help understand the concepts and the lingo. So that way, as we dive deeper into some really dense subjects, I can link these at the bottom of a video and say, hey, don't feel bad if you don't understand what I'm talking about. Here's where you can go and get some of that information. I got a few more. One of them is Revelation of the Method. I talk about this a lot on Real Conspiracies, so I feel like it's a good place to bring it up. This is a concept where those in power reveal their intentions or plans, often through media or other means as a way to subtly disclose the truth. So this idea suggests that by revealing their actions in often subtle or symbolic ways, they can gain passive consent from the public. And the question then becomes why, and this is a bit of a deeper subject, but if you understand the religion of the elites, the Gnostic mystery schools and Freemasonry and Kabbalah and karma and chakras and things like that. There is definitely a belief in karma, a belief in a universal law that dictates that you can't deceive people in certain ways, right? What they're doing is still incredibly deceptive, but in their twisted sense of morality, it kind of makes sense, or at least in a way it excuses them of the guilt that they would feel in their religion. Actually, and even though I am not, and everybody knows this, a fan of Andrew Tate, he actually did an extremely a very good job of describing exactly what I'm talking about. So I am going to play this quick video of his kind of describing that belief system and how it works.
What are the statistical odds of repeated references to pedophilia being included in multiple advertisement campaigns for one particular brand? Basically, completely impossible. This is very, very purposeful. They're doing this because of karmic retribution. Satanists believe if they tell you what they're doing, if they make their intentions clear and you still adhere to them, that they are no longer responsible for the negative consequences of them. That is karmic retribution. I'll give an example. If I have a stall of poisoned apples and I put up a sign that says apples and you buy one, I've poisoned you. But if I have a stall of poisoned apples and I put up a sign that says poison apples and you buy one, now you've committed suicide. I have not poisoned you, you have committed suicide. If you know what I am doing, if you know what I am selling, and you still comply and adhere, you are basically saying that all the consequences are erased.
All right, so I realized while editing this video that my audio cut out there after the Andrew Tate video. So yes, he does a really good job of describing that idea. Some people call it universal law. There's a certain principle in universal law or karmic debt, karmic retribution, whatever you want to call it. And they actually believe that they can deceive people, but they're not deceiving people because they said the thing out loud and you're just going along with it. It is still a form of deception, but in their twisted religion, it's a way of deceiving you, getting your consent. It's kind of a demonic form of consent, tricking you into consent. That's exactly what they're doing. And this is what I believe is happening here in this video with Bill Gates.
Let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
All right, so if you didn't catch what he just said, he literally said, and if you know anything about Bill Gates, it's very clear what he's saying. He said, we have too many people. His whole goal is to go around and make sure that people in Africa don't have kids and things like that. Like, he spends a ton of money to make sure that abortions are happening, that people are having contraceptives in countries that don't believe in them. They're pushing that in Africa and places like that. And he says, look, this whole speech is about how there's too many people, how there's an overpopulation problem. He says we have about 6.8 billion. We're going to head to 9 billion. But if we do a good job with vaccines and abortion, which is the euphemism he used next, that we can get that number down. Why would he say that? He must have misspoken. That is exactly how this works, right? Is that people are watching this, they go, he must have misspoken. He doesn't have to clarify. He doesn't have to apologize. He told you what the goal is, what the plan is. He revealed the method to you. And now you are having to tacitly accept what he's saying, right? This is the poisoned apple example. He's saying we are going to poison the apple, the vaccines, in order to reduce the population. And now he's told you what is going to happen. And now they have your consent by taking that poisoned apple in this scenario and injecting that poisoned apple into your body. Because they put it out there, right? But he must have misspoken. He's never clarified. He's never said, no, I didn't mean that or whatever. It's clear in the context that he is equating vaccines and their type of healthcare and abortion all in ways of reducing the population. You would not say, hey, if we give out more vaccines, it will reduce the population, unless you meant, like, there's no way to interpret what he said as, well, he was saying that vaccines are going to help the population not die and also abortions are going to lower it or something. It literally makes no sense. He's saying the thing out loud. He's putting it out there. He's revealing the method, and the useful idiots are doing the work for him in the comment section. He misspoke. You misunderstood him. You took him out of context, blah, 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 blah. I've watched the entire speech. There's no way to interpret what he said other than exactly what you just heard. Another example, and this one often gets a little bit skewed and confused with revelation method for obvious reasons, and we'll get into the differences, predictive programming. This is the use of media, often fiction, to make the populace more accepting of future events. So an example is lockdowns. How did the world so easily and readily accept being locked into our homes and unable to work, go to the store, see friends and family? How did we just accept that? How did 15 days to slow the spread not make us go, what? That's a thing that we're going to do? We're just going to lock everybody in their homes. And then when it didn't end after 15 days and went on for 2 years, how did we as a populace accept that? And a lot of people believe it has to do with predictive programming, because we had movies like Contagion. We had movies like Outbreak that showed us a world where a deadly virus forced people to lock down and how the government would take care of the issue while we wait, right? So we've already seen in films and books and things like that how this all works out. We've been programmed to go, okay, now we understand the concept, now we understand the threat, now we understand what we're supposed to do, and then we fall into line because we've been programmed through media, through fiction, through things like that, to accept a new reality after decades of seeing it in fiction. Now it happens, we're not freaked out, right? Like, we're prepared. We are mentally prepared for this. These portrayals in movie and TV make people more comfortable with the ideas of pandemic. They made them comfortable with the ideas of quarantine. They made them comfortable with even increased surveillance and control during a health crisis. That's predictive programming. So the key differences between predictive programming and revelation of the method has to do, one, with intent and the mechanism. So revelation of the method is seen as a type of ritual disclosure. This has a lot more to do with the mystery religions and Freemasonry and things like that. Often it's interpreted as deliberately minimal or symbolic, and it's supposed to absolve the powerful of guilt or to trick the public into consent. That is revelation of the method. Predictive programming is more about familiarizing the public with ideas or scenarios, usually through fiction. So they're psychologically prepared and less resistant is the key, less resistant when similar events unfold in real life. So when you see something happen in a movie and then you see it starting to happen in real life, your brain is already like, I already know how this goes. I'm not freaked out. It's not a new scenario. I've already kind of game planned this in my head, and the movies are telling you how to react, right? So that's predictive programming. It also has to do with how they manifest. Revelation of the method could appear in subtle and often cryptic ways, like certain speeches, symbols, or public statements. Maybe throwing in New World Order into a speech by George Bush in 1990, and we just kind of like start accepting that New World Order is a term for a global form of governance, and we're just going to start hearing that and accepting that that's what they're selling us. That you're voting for this guy, you're voting for a guy who said he wants a new world order, he wants to build back better, which is part of the WF agenda. They're telling you what they're going to do, right? They're telling you about the global new world order over and over and over again. And then you've got the useful idiots in the media telling you, well, predictive programming, though, usually involves more direct storytelling methods, such as plot lines, whole plot lines in movies, TV shows, or themes of popular media. So it's a lot more direct. So revelation of the method is, we told you, but it's really deceptive, right? It's deceptive and subtle and whatever. It's like, well, I didn't realize that was an agreement, but that's all that the demons need, is some form of tacit agreement. Predictive programming is a lot more in your face. It's, here's a plot line of the future. Here's what we're going to do. And you are going to accept it because you've seen it in fiction and media and things like that so many times, that now that it's happening, you're probably not going to push back against it too much. So those are some conspiracy terminology. I hope it helped. I hope that explaining that will either help you if you didn't know, or give you some examples, or give you better ways to explain it to other people, maybe some examples to go along with it to explain it to other people. I think that often there's a barrier for people who are starting to recognize that they've been lied to, that the term conspiracy theorist in and of itself is a psyop in order to get people not to question. And those people need resources. They need help. They need sane, rational conversation with people who are further down the bunny trail, or whatever you want to call it, than they are. And this is that. So hopefully it helped you either with that. You could share this with a friend. You could do things like that. This is not what every episode of Dark Ocean is going to be. But like I said, starting the show off, I thought I really want to go deep onto some subjects that I often get a lot of these questions about. So I'm hoping to get a few of these videos out, explain things to people, make it a little bit more accessible to people, and bring them along the way. This is a brand new podcast, so please like, share, subscribe, 5-star reviews, all of that stuff helps. Going forward, I'm going to have new episodes of Dark Ocean every Thursday. I'm going to have Real Conspiracies every Tuesday. And again, that's REEL as in movie reel, every Tuesday, where I deep dive into occult symbolism and hidden messages in movies and video games and stuff like that. But on Dark Ocean, I'm going to be deep diving into conspiracies, cryptids, Nephilim, paranormal, high strangeness, a bunch more. Thank you so much for listening to Dark Ocean with me, PJ Williams. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, 5-star reviews anywhere you listen goes a long way. And remember, guys, the world is a dark ocean, and we're just swimming in it. I hope I can shed some light. God bless.